On a quiet March evening in 2014 in the small town of Hope Mills, North Carolina, a 15-year-old girl walked out of her home and vanished. She promised her grandfather she'd be right back, but she never returned. Days turned into weeks, and hope turned into fear as her face appeared on posters, across social media feeds, and in the worried whispers of an entire community. Everyone was searching for Danielle Locklear, but no one could have imagined the horrifying truth about who was hiding in plain sight. What if the person you loved, the person you trusted most, could smile at you in the daylight and strangle you in the dark? What if the very person who joined in the desperate search for you was the one who had left you at the bottom of a river? This is not just the story of a missing child. This is a story of betrayal, a chilling cover-up, and a heartbreaking discovery that shook a town to its core. Behind the headlines, behind the tears of her family, lies the secret Danielle never lived to tell. And tonight we unravel it. But before we begin, pause for a moment. Danielle's voice was stolen forever. So many other victims' voices are stolen too. If her story fades into silence, how many more will disappear without anyone remembering their names? Don't let Danielle's memory vanish. Don't let her story sink beneath the river the way her body was. Subscribe to Unraveling Crimes right now, and make sure the truth is never buried. Because what you're about to hear will haunt you, and it will remind you that sometimes the real monsters don't lurk in the shadows. They're the ones standing right beside us. Before her name became a headline, before her picture was plastered on missing posters, Danielle Nicole Locklear was just a 15-year-old girl living the simple life of a high school freshman. She was born in 1998 and grew up in the small community of Hope Mills, North Carolina. A town where neighbors waved at each other, children rode bikes down quiet streets, and families gathered at church on Sundays. It wasn't the kind of place where anyone expected tragedy to strike. Danielle was raised by her grandparents, and she was the kind of granddaughter every family prays for. Sweet, bubbly, with a smile that could light up a room, she wasn't just another teenager blending into the hallways of Southview High School. Friends say she loved to laugh, she loved music, and she had a way of making others feel included. She was the type of girl you remembered even if you only met her once. At Southview High, Danielle was full of life. She was young, curious, and just beginning to taste freedom. Like most teenagers, she was caught between the innocence of childhood and the struggles of growing up. She was finding herself, testing boundaries, navigating friendships, and yes, experiencing her first real relationship. To her friends, she was that energetic classmate who made even the dullest day brighter. To her family, she was a beloved child with dreams that stretched far beyond Hope Mills. Danielle was not perfect. Number 15-year-old is. She was headstrong at times, independent, and eager to prove she was old enough to make her own choices. She loved being social, spending time with friends, and like many teenagers, she sometimes pushed against the rules her grandparents tried to set. But that's what made her so real, so relatable. Danielle was every teenager. She could have been your sister, your cousin, your daughter. But behind Danielle's bright smile, there was another part of her story, one that involved young love. She had been in a relationship with a boy named J. Michael Malloy. At first, it was the kind of innocent teenage romance that families brush off as puppy love. But over time, that relationship became complicated, filled with emotions far too heavy for two teenagers to carry. And soon, it would become the backdrop for one of the most tragic stories Hope Mills had ever seen. This is who Danielle was. A girl with her whole life ahead of her, a child of laughter and light. And in March of 2014, that light would be snuffed out forever. March 11, 2014, began as an ordinary Tuesday in Hope Mills. Nothing about that day suggested tragedy. Danielle Locklear spent the afternoon like countless other teenagers. chatting with friends, joking around, scrolling through her phone. To those who saw her, she looked like the same lively 15-year-old she had always been. No one could have guessed that this would be the last time they would ever see her alive. That evening, Danielle was at home with her grandparents. She told her grandfather that she was stepping out for a little while to visit a friend nearby. To him it sounded harmless. After all, Hope Mills was a safe town. She promised she would be back soon. But what her grandfather didn't know was that Danielle had other plans. She wasn't going to see just any friend. She was going to see her ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old J. Michael Malloy. Danielle and J. Michael's relationship had ended recently, but like many young loves, the bond wasn't so easily broken. They had been trying to navigate the messy aftermath of a teenage breakup, filled with lingering feelings, arguments, and complicated emotions that Danielle was far too young to handle. That night, J. Michael wanted to meet her near a local creek, a quiet spot they both knew well. Danielle agreed. The sun dipped beneath the horizon and the air turned cool. Danielle slipped out into the night. She walked down familiar streets, her footsteps echoing softly. The sound of crickets filled the silence as she approached the creek, a place that once held memories of laughter and whispered conversations, now about to become the setting of her darkest hour. No one knows the exact words exchanged when Danielle and J. Michael met that night. But investigators would later learn that an argument broke out between them. What began as a conversation spiraled into something far more dangerous. J. Michael, overcome with rage, lashed out. And in that moment everything changed. For Danielle, there was no escape. Back at her grandparents' home, the night dragged on. Minutes became hours. Her grandfather waited, thinking she would walk through the door at any moment. But Danielle never returned. What her family thought would be a short visit to a friend's house had become the beginning of every parent's worst nightmare. And in the shadows by the creek, the tragic story of Danielle Locklear was only just beginning. When Danielle Locklear didn't return home on the night of March 11th, her grandfather's concern began as a small worry. Maybe she had lost track of time. Maybe she was still with her friend. But as the hours dragged on, that small worry grew into something darker. By midnight, the house was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of a phone that never rang. Her family searched the neighborhood, calling out her name into the night air. There was no answer. By morning, the Locklear home was buzzing with anxiety. Danielle wasn't the type to run away, and she wasn't careless with her promises. Something was wrong. The Hope Mills police were contacted, and soon what started as a family's worry became a community-wide search. Flyers with Danielle's smiling face began appearing on telephone poles, in storefront windows, and across social media. Local news stations picked up the story. A 15-year-old girl missing without a trace. Friends shared her photo online, begging for any clue, any sighting. Volunteers joined hands with officers, combing through wooded areas and searching along trails. Hope Mills, a quiet town not used to headlines, was now gripped by fear. In those first days, Danielle's classmates at Southview High whispered in the hallways. Teachers tried to keep order, but the empty seat where Danielle once sat was a constant reminder. Rumors spread, theories formed, but no one had real answers. All anyone could do was wait. And then, in a chilling twist, there was J. Michael Malloy, Danielle's ex-boyfriend, the boy who knew exactly what had happened that night by the creek, stood shoulder to shoulder with her family during the search. He appeared worried, spoke of missing her, and even joined efforts to find her. To those around him, he was just another teenager concerned for a lost friend. But behind that mask of concern, he was hiding the darkest secret of all. The Locklear family clung to hope. Maybe Danielle had run away and would walk through the door any moment. Maybe she was staying with someone and too afraid to come home. But deep down, the gnawing fear only grew stronger. Each day that passed without a clue pushed them closer to the truth they dreaded most. For 3 long weeks, Hope Mills searched, prayed, and waited. And all the while, the South River kept its secret, cradling Danielle's body in its cold waters, weighed down with cinder blocks as her killer walked free among those who loved her. For weeks, Danielle Locklear was simply missing. Her family begged for answers. Her friends prayed for her safe return. But behind the scenes, the truth of what happened that night in March was already sealed, hidden beneath the waters of the South River. On the night of March 11th, Danielle met Michael Malloy at the creek. Their relationship had ended, but feelings lingered. What should have been an ordinary teenage argument spiraled out of control. Words turned sharp, emotions boiled over, and Michael snapped. In that moment of rage, he reached for Danielle and squeezed the life out of her. Investigators would later reveal how Danielle's final moments were cruelly robbed from her. Malloy's hands tightened around her throat, cutting off her cries for help. And then, in an act both desperate and merciless, he stuffed a sock into her mouth. This wasn't just anger. This was murder. But Michael Malloy wasn't alone in what came next. Panic set in. Fear of being caught consumed him. And so he called a friend, Dominic Tavon Locke. Together, the 2 teenagers made a decision that would haunt Hope Mills forever. They lifted Danielle's lifeless body, and with chilling calculation, tied cinder blocks to her small frame. In the dead of night, they carried her to the South River, the moonlight reflecting off the water's surface. With each step, the weight of their actions grew heavier. And then, without hesitation, they pushed her into the cold, dark current. Danielle sank beneath the water, swallowed by silence, hidden from the world that loved her. Afterward, the 2 boys walked away as though nothing had happened. They went back to their homes, their schools, their lives. And in the days that followed, Michael Malloy even joined the search for Danielle, standing among those desperate to find her, pretending to be broken, pretending to care. The creek, once a place of young love, had become the scene of a nightmare. And the South River, forced to cradle Danielle's body, became the unwilling keeper of a terrible secret. For nearly a month no one knew. Danielle's family lived with the torment of not knowing what happened to their little girl. But the truth was already written. In the rage of a boyfriend, the silence of a friend, and the waters of a river that refused to give her back. The days after Danielle's disappearance stretched endlessly. For her family, time slowed into unbearable silence. Each morning, her grandmother rose with the same question burning in her chest. Where is Danielle? Each night, her grandfather replayed her final words before she left the house, wondering if there had been some sign, some clue he had missed. Hope Mills rallied behind them. Candlelight vigils were held, with classmates holding posters of Danielle's smiling face. Churches prayed for her safe return. Volunteers searched through woods, abandoned lots, and lonely backroads. The town, once quiet and ordinary, was now gripped by a growing sense of unease. If Danielle could vanish, then no one was safe. Inside Southview High School, the absence was glaring. Her empty seat was a constant reminder to her friends and teachers that something was terribly wrong. Students scrolled through her social media pages, leaving desperate messages, begging her to come home. Hallway conversations always circled back to Danielle. Had she run away? Was she hiding? Was she taken? But no one knew. And then there was Michael Malloy. He walked among them, the boyfriend, the ex-lover, the one Danielle trusted. He joined in the search, kept up the mask of worry, and offered false hope. To her grieving family, he was just another teenager concerned for their missing girl. But only he and Dominic Locke knew the truth. While the town searched, Danielle lay in the South River, weighed down by concrete, her voice silenced, her body hidden. The Locklear family refused to give up hope. Her grandmother clung to the belief that Danielle would come home, even as the weeks dragged on. But beneath that hope was a growing, gnawing fear. The kind of fear that keeps you awake at night, staring into the dark, afraid of the answer that might come. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of unanswered questions. 3 weeks of agonizing silence. And all the while, the river kept its secret, carrying Danielle in its cold embrace, while her killers walked free under the same sun that should have shined on her. For 3 long weeks, the South River kept its secret. Beneath the murky waters, Danielle Locklear's body lay tethered to cinder blocks, hidden from the world that desperately searched for her. Her family still clung to hope, though it grew thinner with each passing day. And then, the river finally spoke. On April 2, 2014, an off-duty police officer was walking near the banks of the South River. Something caught his eye, something out of place against the calm current. It was the faint, unmistakable outline of a body. The officer called it in immediately, and within hours investigators swarmed the scene. The recovery was heartbreaking. As divers entered the water and pulled the body to shore, the weight of the cinder blocks told a silent story of cruelty. It didn't take long for authorities to confirm what everyone feared. The body was Danielle Locklear. News spread through Hope Mills like wildfire. A community that had prayed for a miracle now faced a devastating reality. Danielle was gone, and not just gone but murdered, discarded like something to be erased. The images of her smiling face on posters on news broadcasts now carried a much darker shadow. The town mourned, classrooms fell silent, and her family's world collapsed. Her grandmother wept as she received the news no parent, no guardian should ever hear. Her friends sat in shock, struggling to make sense of how a girl so full of life could end up at the bottom of a river. And yet, even in that moment of unbearable grief, no one outside the investigation knew the darkest truth. That the very boy who searched beside them, the boy they trusted, was the one who had put her there. This was no accident. This was no runaway story. This was murder. Imagine waiting for weeks, praying for a knock on the door, only to be told your child has been found in a river tied to cinder blocks. That is the reality Danielle's family lives with. Stories like hers are too real, too raw to ever be forgotten. But here's the truth: if we stop telling them, they will fade. Don't let Danielle's memory sink beneath the surface like the night she was taken. Subscribe now to Unraveling Crimes, so you never turn away from the voices that can no longer speak for themselves. For weeks, Hope Mills had been a town on edge. With Danielle's body recovered, the question burned hotter than ever. Who could do such a thing to a 15-year-old girl? Who could betray her, silence her, and then attempt to erase her existence? The answer was far closer than anyone wanted to believe. Suspicion began to mount around Danielle's ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old Michael Malloy. He had joined in the searches, walked beside her family, and appeared shaken when her body was found. But to investigators, something felt off. His story of the night Danielle vanished was inconsistent. Small details didn't add up. And behind the nervous eyes of a teenager was a truth struggling to stay buried. When detectives brought Michael in for questioning, the weight of the crime pressed down. At first he denied everything. He claimed he hadn't seen Danielle that night. But the evidence told another story, and so did his conscience. After hours of interrogation, the dam finally broke. Michael confessed. What he admitted sent shockwaves through the investigation. On the night of March 11th, Danielle had snuck out of her house to meet him. But what should have been an innocent meeting between teenagers spiraled into something deadly. They argued, over their breakup, over jealousy, over things that might seem small in the eyes of adults but felt like the end of the world to them. In a moment of rage, Michael placed his hands around Danielle's neck and squeezed. She fought, but he didn't let go. And when it was over, Danielle Locklear was gone. But the horror didn't stop there. Instead of calling for help, instead of showing even a shred of remorse, Michael panicked. He called his best friend Dominic Locke. Together they carried Danielle's lifeless body, weighed her down with cinder blocks, and threw her into the South River, as if she were a secret to be hidden forever. A choice that turned a crime of passion into a calculated act of cruelty. With his confession, the boy who once kissed Danielle's hand and promised her forever now stood exposed as her killer. The betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself. This wasn't a stranger in the shadows. This was someone she trusted, someone who smiled in photos with her, someone who played the role of grieving ex while knowing the truth all along. The arrest of Michael Malloy was like ripping the mask off a wolf in sheep's clothing. The town of Hope Mills recoiled in horror. Parents clutched their children a little tighter. Friends cried at the thought of betrayal that intimate, that cruel. Danielle's family, already broken, now had to face the sickening reality that the boy they welcomed into their home had stolen their daughter forever. By the time Michael Malloy confessed to killing Danielle Locklear, the town of Hope Mills was already in mourning. But confession was not enough. Now the justice system had to decide his fate. In 2016, nearly 2 years after Danielle's murder, Michael Malloy walked into a Cumberland County courtroom, no longer just a teenager from Hope Mills, but a confessed killer standing before a judge. The weight of the crime he had committed, strangling a 15-year-old girl and discarding her body like trash, hung heavy in the air. Families, friends, reporters, and townspeople filled the benches, each waiting to see how justice would be delivered. Prosecutors laid out the timeline in stark detail. They spoke of Danielle sneaking out to meet the boy she once loved. They spoke of the argument that turned violent, of the hands that cut off her breath, and of the calculated cruelty that followed. The cinder blocks, the river, the weeks of silence. And then came the betrayal. Michael joining the searches, feigning innocence, while Danielle's family begged the world for answers. The defense tried to paint him as a boy who had made a terrible mistake in a fit of rage, not a monster. They spoke of his age, his immaturity, his lack of a criminal record. But to Danielle's family, no explanation could ever soften the horror of his actions. Their daughter was gone and nothing would bring her back. When Danielle's aunt took the stand, her words pierced the courtroom. She described the pain of telling Danielle's little cousins that she was never coming home. She described a family forever shattered, birthdays and holidays now marked by an empty seat. Her words were not just testimony, they were the sound of a family's heart breaking in public. Then came the sentencing. Michael Malloy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was handed a sentence of 25 to 31 years in prison. His accomplice, Dominic Locke, who helped dispose of Danielle's body, received a lesser sentence, 6 years behind bars. For some it felt like justice. For others, no sentence could ever equal the life stolen that night. Danielle would never walk through her front door again. She would never graduate, never fall in love again, never grow up. And that reality weighed heavier than any prison term. As deputies led Michael out of the courtroom, the image was burned into the minds of everyone present. A boy once seen holding Danielle's hand, now shackled and led away as a murderer. It was the final chapter of a tragedy that had begun with teenage love and ended in betrayal, death, and a family's everlasting grief. But for Danielle's loved ones, the trial did not bring closure. Justice may have been served in the eyes of the law, but in their hearts, the sentence was a lifetime without Danielle. And that was the harshest punishment of all. When the courtroom doors finally closed and the sentence was handed down, the town of Hope Mills was left with silence. A silence that was louder than words. Danielle Locklear was still gone, and no amount of justice could bring her back. Her family returned to a house where her laughter would never echo again. Her friends returned to classrooms where her desk sat empty. For a long time, even ordinary things, a favorite song, a school hallway, a walk to the creek, were painful reminders of what had been lost. The Locklear family, once full of warmth and light, now carried a grief that would never truly fade. Danielle's mother, in particular, was left with the unbearable weight of outliving her child. In Hope Mills, parents held their children a little closer. Teenagers thought twice about sneaking out into the night. And in the quiet moments, the community asked themselves how a love story between two kids could ever unravel into something so dark, so final. Danielle's murder was more than a crime. It was a lesson written in blood about trust, betrayal, and the fragility of life. For the Locklears, remembrance became a way of survival. They spoke her name, they shared her photos, they made sure that Danielle wasn't reduced to just a headline or a cautionary tale. She was more than her death. She was a daughter, a niece, a friend, a girl who loved baking cookies and decorating them with her aunt, a girl whose smile could light up the room. Danielle's story became both a tragedy and a torch, carried by those who loved her, to remind the world of her light. Meanwhile, in prison walls miles away, Michael Malloy began serving his decades-long sentence. For him, time would pass slowly. But for Danielle's family, time had stopped the moment her life was taken. Their reality was not measured in prison years, but in birthdays missed, graduations uncelebrated, and hugs they would never feel again. And so the story of Danielle Locklear is one that lingers, etched in the heart of Hope Mills and beyond. It is the story of a young girl who trusted the wrong person, of a community that searched and prayed, of a family broken by loss but determined to remember, and of a truth too painful to forget, that sometimes the greatest danger lies not in strangers, but in those we think we know best. This was the tragedy of Danielle Locklear, a girl whose light was stolen too soon, but whose memory will never fade. Danielle Locklear's story is not just another case file. It's a reminder of how quickly life can change, how betrayal can come from the people closest to us, and how fragile trust can truly be. A 15-year-old girl with dreams, laughter, and innocence, silenced forever by the hands of someone she once loved. And tonight, as her family mourns in silence and her empty chair remains untouched, her story echoes louder than ever. But ask yourself this: how many more Danielles are out there? How many families searching for answers right now, praying that the truth will surface? The sad reality is, stories like these don't stop. They unfold in towns just like yours, in schools just like Danielle's, and in homes where no one suspects the danger hiding in plain sight. That's why we tell these stories on Unraveling Crimes. Because forgetting them would mean Danielle's voice and voices like hers are lost forever. And here's the truth. If you watch her story, if you feel that ache in your chest right now but you click away without subscribing, then you're letting her name fade into silence again. Do you really want to be that person? Subscribe now, because every story matters. Subscribe now, because Danielle deserves to be remembered. Subscribe now, because the next case we cover may hit closer to home than you think. Subscribe now, because if you don't, stories like Danielle's will sink into the river of forgotten victims. And subscribe now, because one day when you hear another chilling name in the headlines, you'll wish you had paid attention. This is Unraveling Crimes. And remember, the stories we tell are more than just crimes. They are warnings. They are voices. They are lives. Don't let them be erased.